I think all ministers have a story like this. You're in conversation with somebody in BC before COVID times. It might be at a party or at the gym, and just somebody casually asks, "What do you do?" And when you respond with, "I'm a minister," there's always some kind of reaction. Sometimes your conversational partner tries to engage you in, "Don't you think that the end times are upon us?" And sometimes people hear that you're a minister and they kind of draw up and draw away, sometimes physically step away, suddenly uncomfortable. Sometimes people respond with an apology. "I'm sorry, Pastor, but I'm not religious." It's kind of a sorry, not sorry kind of an apology. There's often a statement kind of like this: "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." Now, maybe that phrase was once a completely original thing to say. Maybe it was a powerful declaration marking a person's liberation from outdated dogma and toxic superstition. More power to you, I say. All of us should question the certainties and the capital T truths that have been presented to us as beyond doubt. Many of you might know the reading that's in the back of our gray hardback hymnal. It says, "Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the servant of truth." Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief. Now, incidentally, this reading by the UU minister Robert Weston has been reprinted many, many times, including in the prayer book of Reformed Judaism. But back to the awkward conversation. "What do you do?" "I'm a minister" kind of interaction, and the reaction that often follows. "I'm sorry, not sorry. I'm spiritual, but not religious." There's a minister who started out as a blogger, Lillian Daniel. She serves as the pastor of the First Congregational Church of Dubuque, Iowa. Not a bastion of New Age spirituality, Dubuque. And Lillian Daniels says, nevertheless, she gets that spiritual but not religious thing all the time. In a blog post years ago, she offered this thought: "Thank you for sharing, spiritual but not religious person. You are now comfortably in the norm for American culture, right smack in the bland majority of people who find ancient religions dull, but themselves uniquely fascinating." Ooh, ouch. Now remember, I'm just the messenger. And in our religion, we let it be a dance, and we're used to having our toes get stepped on a little bit. Lillian Daniels is an equal opportunity toe stepper, believe me. She points out that the spiritual but not religious phrase has become such a cliche that the recitation of people's disaffection from church or synagogue or mosque is, well, pretty predictable. And lest you think that I'm being too judgy, I should admit right up front that my own story, my spiritual journey, starts very much this way. I was dragged to church as a kid, not literally like by my hair, drag kicking and screaming, but there was no option. There was no choice but to go to church, and I was made there to sit through boring sermons. I wonder if maybe the worst part of this virtual church is that you don't get a bulletin at the beginning, because I spent huge amounts of time carefully coloring in all the O's in the bulletin. And if you've got an adult coloring project going on right now, rock on. Anyway, for me, church was not terrible, it was not terrifying, and I know that some folks had those experiences, and I'm sorry. If you're tuning in to this message today, it means you are exploring and looking for a place to heal, and I'm glad. More often than the stories of trauma, I hear stories more like mine, people who weren't engaged in a meaningful way with church. And in my case, as soon as I was old enough not to go, I quit. Done with that, not a church-going kind of person. The universe, as they say, has a terrific sense of humor. Now, this isn't the moment for me to tell you my spiritual journey in great detail. Just know that my spiritual journey story is, well, pretty much predictable. And as Lillian Daniels would say, it's terrifically, wonderfully boring. So I more or less just drifted away from the habit of going to church. I began to find meaning in sitting around on Sunday and drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. If I wanted to encounter the holy, I might look for a sunset. Lillian Daniels says she has heard so often about God and the sunset that she likes to raise her eyebrows and say, "Oh, seriously, God in the sunset? You can do that?" As if seeing God in the natural world must be a totally astonishing idea for people who do attend church. Like, once you join a church, you must never leave the building. So, Pastor Daniels was weary from the assumptions that the spiritual folks made about church. And she wrote this blog post called "Spiritual but Not Religious? Please stop boring me." Got people really stirred up. Some of those really spiritual people, those so centered, I don't know, was it self-centered? They got really mean on the internet. Turns out you can be spiritual and also a troll and a bully. They come in all packages. So Reverend Daniels thought, well, maybe not enough people heard me the first time, so she wrote her thoughts into a book, and it became a nationwide bestseller. I'll bet some of you have read the book, and if you haven't, check it out. Reverend Daniels was just at the end of her rope. She said she had heard so often about how stupid religious people were because they believe in fairy tales and they're so bigoted, and their fondest wish is always to convert the non-religious, to which Reverend Daniels responds, "I am tired of apologizing for a church I'm not a member of." Unitarian Universalist, can I get a witness? I'm tired of apologizing for a church I'm not a member of. Preach it, Reverend Lillian. So Lillian Daniels' second book, second bestseller, was entitled "Tired of Apologizing for a Church I Don't Belong to." She had more powerful and pointed critique. She says, being privately spiritual just doesn't interest me. There is nothing challenging about having deep thoughts all by oneself. What is interesting is doing this work in community where other people might call you on stuff or, heaven forbid, disagree with you. Where life gets rich and provocative is when you dig deeply into a tradition that you did not invent all for yourself. I've been reading about how trees in a forest, trees of different species, through their roots form an interdependent web connected by fungi, tiny strands at their root level. And you would think that saplings planted in open, airy spaces with no competition for light and for water would thrive, but it turns out that those saplings on their own have a much harder time surviving than the trees who live together in a diverse community. Those little saplings can't invent the network It's kind of like those deeply spiritual and well-meaning people who discover that they can't invent a rich tradition that goes so deep. They can't create all by themselves the loam where their roots can find purchase and sustenance. Now, to say that we are in an era of profound change, profound transformation, seems like an understatement, I know. We're in a time when rejection of religious community has become the norm for most Americans. Church affiliation has plummeted. And the pandemic, well, it's awful, it's horrifying, and maybe, just maybe, it'll force us to look at our practices, to look at our systems, healthcare, education, religion, all in need of some shaking up, some prying loose the old threads, picking them out, reweaving the fabric. And here we are in this fellowship exploring what it means to be part of a spiritual community and kind of sewing it together, making it up as we go in this pandemic time. And I'm going to dare say this, we're not just a spiritual community, we are a religious community. Now stay with me, don't touch that dial. Here's something I know about religion. I mean the word, not the subject. Picture the word in your mind, R-E-L-I-G-I-O-N. Now let your focus shift to those letters in the middle, the L-I-G. You have seen those letters before. In other words, ligament, for instance. There's a clue in that shift. The L-I-G in religion comes from the same place as the L-I-G in ligament. The root meaning is connective tissue. It's something that joins separate things into a working whole. The knee bone's connected to the thigh bone because of the ligaments that are there. And remember, a healthy ligament has to stay flexible. Its function is to connect things, not to restrict them. So think about it. The next time you hear somebody say spiritual but not religious, I know that they mean to say that they are casting off, restricting dogma, more power to them. That's wonderful. But what they may also be saying without really thinking about it is that they have become disconnected from community. And in this strange era of social disconnection, that's a challenging place to be. How can a person cast off those old strictures and dogma and still seek a network of support, a sustaining, interconnected web? Is it even possible for people who don't even consider themselves religious to be part of a religious community? I submit to you John Hooper, a man whose secular humanist credentials are impeccable. John Hooper serves on the board of the Humanist Institute and also the Institute for Humanist Studies and the Secular Coalition for America, the Yale Humanist Community, and the Connecticut Coalition of Reason, to name a few. He's also a longtime Unitarian Universalist, a congregational leader in his UU Church in Westport, Connecticut. John says he's often asked by people who don't understand why he, of all people, spends so much time in a religious community. And he says, I think we, Unitarian Universalists, are the best game in town for people who are looking for authenticity, acceptance, and love in a dogma-free religious community. I find it interesting that he talks about people who are looking for something rather than people who are running from some past experience, people who are looking for authenticity, acceptance, and love. And he continues, I'm often asked why I remain so closely associated with Unitarian Universalists who might sometimes use God language, and I share that concern. But I always reply, I stay because I love them and they love me. To love someone enough to stay connected in community, even with someone who thinks differently, who uses different language, and who, let's face it, can sometimes be downright irritating, that's part of the genius of religious community and the long tradition in which our roots are sunk. I'll grant you sometimes that while we may love each other, we don't always like each other very much. But in religious community, in a way, we're bound up together. And if any of those tendrils gets disconnected from the root system, we all feel the loss. So we keep coming together, dancing together. We keep bumping into each other, stepping on toes, and it can feel like that story of Noah's Ark, which is only idyllic in children's fables. You know, on a boat with that many animals, there had to be an ungodly stench. But wherever there is the gathering of religious community, there are people with shovels and those who swab the deck sometimes, because that's how religious community works. And sure, there are folks whose toes are way too tender, whose noses can't take the stench. Lillian Daniels says this is the crux of the problem that the spiritual but not religious people have with the church. If we could just kick out all the human beings, we might really be able to do this thing. If we could just kick out all the sinners, we might have a shot at following Jesus. If we could just get rid of all the Republicans, the Democrats could bring about the second coming, and NPR would never need to run another pledge drive. If we could just kick out all the Democrats, the fiscally responsible would turn water into wine, and the church would never need another pledge drive. Yeah, this ligament, this connective tissue that holds us all together, and feeds us, and makes our separate lives into a working whole. It helps support us, challenge each other, move together into the world. This is the interconnected way in which we enrich our collective and individual search for truth and meaning, not just searching where the light shines the brightest, but holding each other accountable for our good intentions, being able to act as one on our shared values in the larger community, affirming, nourishing each other in empathy and caring and even love. Now, is that what it feels like to be engaged with this fellowship? I haven't been here long, and most of our connections have been virtual, but that's what I see, that's what I experience here at UUFA. Not grudging acceptance in spite of our differences, but grace-filled, authentically curious celebration of different ideas, different identities, coming together in one body. The song you chose for your theme this year says it well. Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. May each of us find the rhythm as we celebrate this connective tissue and as we enter into this holy dance.